Dom Corleo recently dropped an album and he did not disappoint. As always, he has his iconic Dom Corleo chop in most of his beats. And today I'm showing you guys two methods that you can use to get this effect, as well as a crazy hi-hat bounce tip that you guys don't want to miss. Before we get into it, be sure to leave a like and a comment if you guys enjoy these types of videos. And be sure to check out our membership system as well. You get all our tutorial FLPs, as well as a bunch of exclusive loops each month. And all the details for that will be down in the description. But without further ado, let's get into it. So starting off with these Dom Corleo beats, the most important part is the chop. And to actually do these chops, you need a melody to work with. To make my loop, I literally took one sound off Electra X and I took a Moog bass and I did this pattern for the Electra X sound. It looks a bit crazy, but it's actually just a simple chord progression with a top line and bass notes. And this is how the sample sounds. Now, like I mentioned, there are two ways to go about making these chops. The first one is fairly simple, but you have the least amount of control. And with this first method, there are no plugins involved. You do everything straight from the playlist. And it's as easy as clicking on this sidebar on your audio file. And then after that, you can hover over the chop option. And under this option, there is a bunch of other options that you can choose. The ones I usually use are under the patterns preset. And I usually choose breakdown 1 or 2, and then I just play around with it. For now, I'll just choose breakdown 1 for an example. And I'll also just pitch up the melody so you guys can kind of hear the chops a bit better. Another thing to keep in mind while you're making these chops in the playlist is it's gonna sound a bit rough. Because it's a big audio file that you are physically just chopping up into a bunch of pieces, it's gonna sound a bit choppy. And to prevent this, you can just open up your waveforms menu, and under the declicking mode, you just choose generic, and that'll get rid of all the clicking noises in between the chops. And like I said, this is only one of the many presets you can use. And once you get a preset that you like, you can play around with it in the playlist. You can change up the timing completely if you wanted to. You can pitch some of the chops up and down. There's honestly a bunch of ways to make this chop your own and not just stick to the preset. It just takes a little more effort to make it sound good compared to the second method. And moving on to the second method, we're using a plugin I'm sure every single FL Studio user knows. It's the OG plugin of chopping, your homeboy Growspeed. And technically, if you wanted to, you can straight up just not even use a preset with this method. And if you have an understanding of Growspeed, you can full on do your chops the way you want to. But luckily for you guys, there are a couple of presets that kind of just work with Dom Corleo beats. I've played around with a bunch of them and I found that the turntablist preset menu is the best for this. And for this specific chop, I use the trifecta chop, which is basically just a triplet chop like most Dom Corleo beats. And there's also a way to get the clicking noises out the same way you did in the playlist. But with Growspeed, you just go under this arrow over here, and under click reduction, you select the melodic high preset. And I'm not too sure what the exact science is of it, but it gets rid of the clicks. And the way that you add variation to this method is either by right-clicking on the mix knob and creating an automation clip. As you can see, I did that here, and this is how it sounds now. And as you can see in here, I literally just ducked down the Growspeed entirely at parts. And this was just kind of to keep the melodic element in the chop. And it doesn't really matter what method you use. As long as you get to the end product that you want, it's all good. If you want to take the time and actually get to know Growspeed and not just use presets, it's probably the best way to do it because you have full control of everything. But you can also just get by with the playlist chopping method, and you can technically have as much control as the Growspeed method as well. And a bonus tip as well, if you want to add even more variation to your beat or loop. And what I did is I literally just reversed the loop, but to keep the loop in the same key and chord progression as your original loop, you'll have to chop up the loop into half-bar sections. And when you're done with that, you just rearrange your loop from back to front and you drag everything in order like this. And what this does is it just keeps that reverse effect as well as keeping your chord progression, and it changes up the melody entirely. So now that you have your chops down, that's basically everything for the loop. So moving on to the drums, you can kind of do whatever. Dom Corleo has a big variety of beats. The main element is just the chops. But recently I've been hearing this new jazz bounce go around everywhere, and it's basically like a bootleg drill in a way. Well, it's basically just copying like drill hi-hats and then just doing normal drums on it, but it adds a lot to the bounce. And as you can hear, it's a pretty basic drill bounce, but something I've been doing recently, especially with these new jazz drill bounces, it's nice to have two separate hi-hat patterns, and I'll keep the first one for the basic bounce, as well as like a roll here and there. But for my second pattern, I mainly keep it just for rolls, and recently I've been adding a bunch of slides to my hats as well. So as you can see, this is the pattern for the accent hats, and one thing to keep note of is I'm constantly playing around with velocity. This just adds a lot to these types of beats. It can literally make or break the bounce. So I recommend that you guys take your time with your hats specifically, because as soon as you get that bounce down, the rest of the beat is kind of a breeze to make. But I started off with a couple of rolls and accent notes, and as you can see at the bottom here, I have a couple of slides as well. And the reason I have this second pattern is that the slides will only affect the accent hats instead of the main hats as well, and this just adds for an even more unique bounce. Moving on from that, I added on this clap pattern. And next up, I added a snare, and I basically just used this for a off snare, and I used a roll every now and then. Next up, I made this 808 pattern with a Yeet 808, and this 808 sound specifically is used in a bunch of Dom Corleone beats, and I usually use this 808 for my main 808, and then I'll add on a bunch of accent 808s afterwards for like a second verse. But this is how the first 808 pattern sounds. And then moving on to the second half of the 808 pattern, an easy way to do this variation where you add a second and third 808 pattern is by literally just copying over the original 808 pattern into a new pattern, making it unique, and then going into the MIDI, and basically wherever you want accent 808s or a roll of a different sound of an 808, you just delete those notes in the MIDI. Or if you want to make your life even easier, you can straight up just highlight the notes and Control X to cut them, and then you can go into your new pattern with your new 808 and just straight up paste it in. And then lastly, I added on a kick to come in on the hooks. And that is about it for the beat. As you guys can see, I literally used like 7 sounds in total. It's super basic. It's just about knowing what to do and what the right bounce is. And if you listen to the new Dom Corleone album, there's a bunch of bounces and sounds you guys can recognize already. So it's also kind of easy to just go listen to the album yourself and then dissect the pieces that you like and try and implement those elements into your own beats. But I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you guys learned something new. Like I said before, if you want this FLP as well as every single FLP from our past tutorials, you can join the membership program in the description. You get a bunch of exclusive loops as well. But like I always say, you guys don't have to do this. You guys liking and watching our videos are already more than enough, and we appreciate every single one of you guys. Once again, I hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next one.